Hello and welcome to another episode of Squirtified Engineering, driving home with Sprutis. So I am Sprutis and I'm not really driving home because it's getting quite dark in Sweden. So we are going towards winter, which means it's darkness outside. So perhaps it wasn't the best time to start doing this sort of podcast. I thought it was quite a good idea when I started it, but the darkness makes it a bit difficult to record video when I'm driving home. So you're getting this instead. I'm recording myself in my living room. I guess it's better than nothing. So as soon as the spring is starting to come along, I will record in my car again. Also, since we are back to basically working like normal, despite being in a total pandemic, I don't really have that much time to work on my channel like I did during the summer. During the summer I actually had 7 weeks off. Normally that's a very long time. I'm not used to being off from work or school that long. It was a bit hard for me, but then again, you couldn't really do anything that you like to do when you have time off. You can't go to restaurants without thinking a few steps further and so on. So for me it was a bit tricky, which meant that I focused on my segment called Home Improvement. So if you haven't looked at that, please have a look. Maybe you find something inspiring or something you can comment on. If you can't comment on it, then I will be more than happy to answer your questions. But back to the segment of today, driving home with Sprutis. And again, just like the last episode, it's 2 days later and it's getting close to midnight. I think we're at 10 in the evening or something like that. But I have finally received some questions. But first of all, I'm Sprutis, and if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing so you can stay up to date with all my different projects. There are quite a lot, and if you haven't realized it until now, the channel is about having a sort of engineering perspective on life and your day-to-day topics, which mostly means working on cars, motorcycles, computers, music instruments, stuff like that, normal stuff. This is an ever-expanding channel, so the topics are quite broad. I hope you can oversee this if you are just interested in one specific topic. I know that you're supposed to have one single topic if you start a channel. I'm not really like that, but if you were to be technically perfect, then the topic is being an engineer in today's life in 2020, which means a lot of stuff. But like I said, I had received a few questions, which is quite nice. So one question is where my nickname Sprutis comes from. Another one was which car was my first project car and how did I discover my passion for vehicles, cars in particular. Let's start with me being 7 years old. I was walking to lunch, walking out of my classroom, and I was hit with an asthma attack. My first ever. So I was, again, 7 years old. I didn't really have a clue on what was going on. I got to lay down on a couch. I still remember those parts. I'm quite a lot older than that now. I was waiting for my mother. I had no sort of warning signs before this. So, and I do realize that there are many children out there in the world who are experiencing far worse things when they are 7 years old. But that was not my youth. My childhood was not part of that. It was part of, well, the Western way of life. You have a childhood, you get to play with friends, you get to go to school, learn a bunch of different things, and then choose your way of education, and finally your way of life and profession. So it was hard for me. I mean, come on, I was a child when I first had my asthma attack. How do you expect a 7-year-old to know where the trouble of breathing comes from? It's not really that hard to understand. I mean, but my mother came and picked me up, and I got to do the tests. You know, they put needles under my skin with different treatments so that they could see what I was allergic to. Because if you have asthma, then it won't come on its own. You always have different allergies to follow that. So in my case, it started out with fur animals, dandruff, cigarette smoke, stuff like that. And due to being incorrectly medicined, I even developed allergy for pollination. So yeah, that's a way of life. You never get to pick the way that you want to travel. But the thing was, most of my friends, they had animals at home. So if we were going home to someone, I always had to ask, do they have pets at home? And if they did, well, then I couldn't join them. So that meant that I had to be left out. Yeah, I got left out. Because the other friends, they went home to this person and they played and had fun. I couldn't join them because that would mean that I would have to put my life on the line. And I know my parents didn't approve of that. So along the same time period, my dad bought me and my sister our first computer, Amiga 500. I've already spoken about that, but it sort of became the easier way of life, getting to learn something like that instead of having to ask my friends, does this guy or girl have a pet at home? That was a bit embarrassing, actually. But going home, I mean, you could always say that my parents need me home by blah blah blah, and I could go home, and instead of actually being required to be at home because of my parents, I would go to my computer and or homework or whatever. But I was quite intrigued by the computers. That's actually how I started to learn English. I would play the game. If you haven't, you really need to try it. Monkey Island 2. It was really impressive. I mean, the old games, they didn't rely on impressive graphics. They relied on an impressive storyline and characters. That was really cool. And also they didn't have the same sort of copy protections that they have today. Today it's quite easy to implement different types of copyrights and ways to stop people from copying, making illegal copies and so on. But back then it was hard, so instead they had this, it was 2 pieces of cardboard. They had different prints on them, and depending on what showed up on the computer screen, you had to turn them in order to line up a few, and that would give you the third one, which is the one that you would click on, and that would start the game. Other games, they had, like, you needed to look in a manual, you needed to look at a certain page, a certain section, a certain word, and then write that in. Surgery, for example. It was very medical. You had to write the word. The flying games, same there. So I didn't know much about the English, so I would ask my parents, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And I forgot my snooze. Hold on. So I would continue to terrorize my parents with different questions about what does this mean. I would say it in Swedish, of course, but yeah, that's the start of my connection with computers. I knew that they had an enormous potential for some reason, and I wanted to carry on in that way. So I actually helped people build their computers. I helped people with fixing different computer problems. I was even on my way to becoming the world's youngest Microsoft certified engineer before the IT bubble popped. But all these people who I helped, they paid me money or in parts. So I got to build my computers. I mean, back then we didn't have broadband like you have today. I mean, even ISDN, 128 kilobit, that was just, it was so far out of my reach that I couldn't even dream of it. Even Voodoo 2, look it up, it was impressive. I remember having a magazine of high score, and I would read the article about Duke Nukem and Voodoo 2 for forever. I mean, I would read it, and once I've read it, I would start over. I was just so impressed by it. But it was too much money. I couldn't afford it, my parents couldn't afford it. So it was a dream. Well, I did what I could with the hardware that I got. So I played the games, I played online. Felia, maybe anyone knows about that. But eventually we got broadband, ADSL. Not very fast, but I mean the difference from my early days of being online, wow, quite impressive. So I started, of course, to modify my computer. So what can you do? Well, you need cooling, so then you need fans, but with fans comes noise. So what can you do in order to comply with that? Well, you can cut away the fan guards, because they are stamped in steel in the computer case. You don't really have something which makes it easier for air to pass through. So it was actually my first boss. He said, well, we have this electrical nibbler. So we used that. He used it on his computer case and I used it on mine. And we cut out all the fan guards. So then we didn't have the fan noise anymore. So it didn't matter when the fans had to speed up a bit in order to comply with the overclocking. And then I started to turn towards more modifications. What can you do? Well, if I cover the entire side of the computer case with masking tape, then I can draw my own figures and I can cut it out and so on, and then I can paint it with spray can. How cool is that? Well, for me it was very cool. So I even made a computer case for my grandparents. So I cut a hole in the roof of the computer case because heat is moving upwards. So you need an opening at the top. So I cut a hole, I placed a fan, I placed a fan guard with round wires instead of the stamped rectangular wires. And then, since I already had cut the metal, I had to rust protect it. So then we come into the world of painting. So I was preparing the stuff in my bedroom and sort of queuing it in my parents' garage. And when I was ready, I took it outside in the middle of the winter. I put the pieces on frigolite, so foam pieces basically, as support. I would spray paint it, then take it back into the garage to make it harden. So when you sort of go down that line, where do you end? Well, one stop is cars. So we had my parents' previous cars. The first car that I ever rode in when I was a baby. It was standing there in the driveway. No one was using it. So my dad, he handed me a knife and he said, scrape some rust, throw on some paint, and we will see if we can make it road legal. I wasn't satisfied by that. So 2 years later I had scraped off the undercoating. I have replaced the rear subframe with one that's been driven on Gotland. For those of you who are not living in Sweden, Gotland is an island to the east of Sweden. You don't really have the same usage of salt and sand during the winter, so it's not really that bad. So I took one of those and I cleaned it off and I painted it and so on and reinstalled it. So 2 years later I was on the road with my own car. I didn't have the money to buy my own car. My parents didn't have the money to buy my own car. But I had prepared a car for myself to be driven on the road. I was so happy that after passing the inspection I went to Bilradiolagret, so BRL, a store who sold speakers and car stereos and stuff like that, and I bought a car stereo for 2,000 Swedish crowns, $200. That might sound like a small amount of money for you, but for me at the time it was like this big. So it was a lot of money for me, and I really wanted this. I had researched this car stereo for a lot of time, so I knew what I wanted. And I was actually expecting my parents to yell at me for spending this much money on a car stereo. But the reaction I got was that my dad went and bought the same car stereo. So that's quite fun. Yeah, so that was my start into cars. I started out at computers and transitioned into cars. I mean, a car is basically a big computer. You have all these hues, you have a bit more advanced support with the wheels and suspension, which makes it a lot more interesting. So the car in question was a Mazda 626 LX, and it was a 2-door coupe. It was the first car I ever rode in. I mean, I was in this car when I went from BV. So where the children pop out. And it was my first own car. So it's and before I ever rode in it, it was my grandparents' car. So for me it means quite a lot. If I could, I would have kept it. Unfortunately, I sold it to an idiot. And yes, he was a true idiot, because he placed it on a grass lawn for an entire winter. after the winter had passed, he told me to replace a lot of stuff on the car because of corrosion. Yeah, he didn't think things through. If you place something with aluminum parts, steel parts on a grass lawn during the winter, you will get different types of oxidation and rust and so on, especially if you never start it. So yeah, you can't really expect the previous owner to pay for your mistakes. He did, and me, who is when I sold the car, I redid a bunch of stuff that I thought was sort of badly done. I mean, stuff that I had repaired with fiberglass, I cut out and I welded those. I spent a lot of time. I even spent an entire bottle of wax just to give it a nice coat. Yeah, it was a $1,000 car. For me, it was worth way more than that. And he destroyed it, so I don't dare to look it up because I would cry. But anyway, that was the start of my car, life in cars. The next car was again a Mazda 626 generation GD. So the one before was a 1984. The new one was a 1990. So I went from a 2-door to a 5-door. And here is where things get interesting. Here's when we're starting to talk about a bit more power. It got a turbo. Not from factory, but from me. And it was, of course, thanks to a friend. I can't take credit for that, but a friend of mine, he sold me a turbo kit. It was a log-based exhaust manifold, prone to cracks. So eventually I made my own extractor manifold. We will talk more about this in another episode or whatever, but this is, my passion for cars had just gone through the roof. There was no stopping me. So this car, a 5-door car, it was practical. The only thing it missed was a tow hitch. That would have been perfect. But I was driving it from school and back, even though I was supposed to take the bus and train. Yeah, I liked that car too much. And again, I sold it to an idiot. This idiot even threatened me. He threatened to send some guys after he drove it with increased boost, which blew the turbo. He threatened me to send some guys to beat me up if I didn't pay him back for the car. Yeah, I don't know why I'm managing to sell cars to these idiots. I even said to him, well, I've spoken with the police. What you're saying is a textbook threat. Then he backed off. I wonder why. But yeah. The thing is, I am a nice guy. I want to sell good things. But if you're buying something that's been modified as extensively as that car, I mean, different pistons, different gearbox, different drivetrain in all aspects, different suspension. It has a turbocharger which is far from stock, an ECU setup. At the time I was running sort of like a piggyback, so I had a Mega Squirt 2 controlling not controlling time but controlling fuel. The original ECU was controlling timing. It worked great. The suspension was very special and so on. So you couldn't find a car like it in... Well, I didn't see the equivalent anywhere on the Mazda forums. So how can you expect that you can just turn up the boost without checking the other stuff? Well, if you're an idiot, then sure. Then I guess you can draw those conclusions. But at the time, I had the Supra. So I had this Mazda. I had it running a turbo, 1 bar of boost. But I knew that if I were going to push it, then I would disintegrate the gearbox, even though it was upgraded, as well as with the clutch and so on. So where do you go from that? Well, if I want even more horsepower in a front wheel drive setup, then I will just basically spin all of that away. So if we're going to spin it, then wouldn't it be more fun to use a rear wheel drive setup? I think so. But if you're going with the rear wheel drive setup, how would you go about that? So you're going from a front wheel drive, which is quite nice. The engine design is very nice. It's the equivalent of the Evo engine, Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution, 4-cylinder, 2-liter, 16 valve. Well, you need to have 4 valve per cylinder. Okay. You can't have a stiff rear axle like a Volvo. That won't do. That's not an upgrade. Okay. So you need something with an individual rear suspension. Fine. Okay, there are a few cars that have that are obtainable by me at the time. But wouldn't it be nice with an inline 6? Sure. BMW? Maybe not at that time. It had a specific stamp here in Sweden. if you drove an inline 6 from BMW. So how do you go about that? You want the performance, you want the suspension. The E30, I mean, it's fun, but the suspension isn't that great, I'm afraid. I mean, you can put down loads of boost on that, but you will just spin it out. So I discovered, first of all, I was aiming for a 5 Series drivetrain and put it in my Mazda 626 1984 2-door coupe. I even went to Göran Malmberg. He has written a book about suspension here in Sweden. I discussed the topic with him. I got to see the Tommaso Pantera. Really impressive. I was pleasantly pleased with him accepting to talk to me about this topic. But when it came down to it, it's cost. So I found an ad for a Supra with a bad picture, a desperate text. So I made a bid on it. I worked the seller for maybe 1 month. So it started out at 28,000 crowns, so $2,800. And I worked it down to 15,000 crowns or $1,500. And I bought it for that. So the Supra Mark III drivetrain, it was going into my Mazda 626 from 1984. Can you imagine that? I could. Until I got behind the steering wheel of the Supra. I instantly fell in love. I even spun it on the first drive. When I looked at the car for purchase, my mind was set on putting the drivetrain into my Mazda. I didn't see any problems with copying the mounting points and so on. I still don't. So I was looking at the car, my Supra, with that sort of mindset, which meant that it didn't matter what the Supra's condition was. Yeah. Again, I was left with a project car for 2 years. So again, I had a car which I spent 2 years on fixing the front and rear subframes. I fixed the wheel tubs in the rear. I repaired all the rust. Not really that good in some cases, but very good in other cases. And yeah, I won't tell you too much now because I want to start a different series talking about what you have missed about my Supra work. So I will take that in that series. But let's just say I was heavily invested in the Supra Mark III. I was in love. As simple as that. I started with the Mazda, continued with the Mazda, and then with another Japanese car. It was a natural progression for me. Not really for my parents because it meant a lot of money, so I actually kept it hidden from them. So I will hold off on spoiling the surprise for them. Don't get me wrong, they have been the biggest supporters of everything I've done. I couldn't ask for anything more. Actually, I'm asking them to pay me, to be able to pay them back. I'm trying as best as I can for that. Helping them currently with installing windows in my sister's house. It's as of today finished. Quite heavy. But still, no, it's nothing comparable to what they've done for me. I can't even formulate the words to describe what they've done for me. And well, they made me into this individual who has, I wouldn't say the knack like in Dilbert, because I'm not that good. I do love things. I love electronics. I love automotive. I'm not the best, but I love it. It's ticking every box in my book. And so in 2004 I went from 12th grade to no, I went from 15th grade, is that correct? So 9, 10, 11, no, 12th grade to college. Yeah, I cried when I was accepted. I did. You have to remember that my dad, he was employed by the college that I was accepted to, so I had spent a lot of, maybe not a lot, but some time of my youth going around there, looking at all the machines, wanting to sometime be ready to use them, and now I was several steps closer to that. So of course I cried. Of happiness, of course. But it took me 3 years until I realized that this wasn't the path for me. So I changed path. I restarted my education at the Royal Institute of Technology, basically from scratch, because I didn't have any credits to my name. I had a few, but not enough. And I got in contact with Formula Student. That just blew my mind. So you could go to college and you could work as an engineer despite having completed the degree, and you get to present your work for amazing people all over the world. How cool is that? I mean, it was so cool, so let's just say that this normal schoolwork got a bit on the back burner, but this eventually landed my job, so I'm happy with it. And it got me in the place that I am today, so no regrets. But yeah, so it's to answer one of the questions that I got, it was through Formula Student that I got my nickname Sprutis. So the Mazda 626 that I put a turbo on, I had Mega Squirt on it. So when we were working on the Formula Student project, I mean, we would work more hours than you'd expect. And you can't really use names, you use nicknames. So if you don't have a special nickname, then tough luck, you will get a generic one. But I was special in that way, I guess, so I got my own Sprutis from Mega Squirt. Squirtified Engineering. So that's how that came along. Yeah. You can think about it in a nasty way if you want. I won't say if it's true or not, but you're welcome to your own opinion. And yeah, the Mazdas were my first way of passion, which started with computers and education. That's why education is key for me. And I mean, I haven't really put it out there, but one of the things that I would like to inspire to is for higher education. If you were to look up the definition on politics, you would see that it's nothing that I enjoy. It's the total opposite of science. You have science, you have politics. The politics is about cutting your opponent by the feet. You're not supposed to enlighten them. And that's what I love about science. A scientific discussion is about enlightening yourself and your opponent, basically. You're not supposed to have an enemy. You're supposed to strive for higher knowledge. And that's what I'm trying to work towards every day. The world is quite grim currently. I don't like it at all. But I love science. I love cars. I love engines. I love motorcycles. And I love computers and what you can do with them. So I combine those. I try to keep this channel free from politics, because if you want to talk about politics or listen on politics, you have so many ways to do that. But I sort of dig my own grave, basically, if I go down the lane of politics. So I don't gain anything from it. I don't think you would gain anything if I were to talk about politics. So that's why I'm trying to stay away from it. I have my opinions, but those are mine. And I don't want those to color this channel, because I want this channel to be inspiring towards learning and science and all that good stuff, like the Goon Squad says. I enjoy that channel, by the way. Even though if they don't have the knowledge, they still try it. They make. I would certainly give them an A for effort. They try their best. They make something, and it's often very good. So that's cool. That's cool to see. And that would be in the name of science, in my opinion. You get, because that's basically all you need. You need a theory on what would happen if you do this. You need the experiment to try it out, and then you need to stop and verify what the result is. It's that basic. Unfortunately, we will try and keep it like that here, at least for now. We will see what happens, but I will try. I'm biting my tongue several times. But yeah, so on the question of where my nickname came from, well, working more than 2 days straight in Formula Student, that brought out my nickname based on my interests before, meaning changing the ECU of cars, and my preference in that was Mega Squirt. Some people don't like it, some people like it, but if you're going to say that you don't like it, please give me a proper reason. You can't say, well, he said, she said. That's not okay. If you can say, well, the calculations for the crank trigger is blah 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 because of blah blah blah, then sure, then you have a valid reason. But if you can't produce a reason like that, then maybe you need to look into how you're making your decisions. I'm not saying that your decisions are incorrect, I'm just saying there might be more to it. And how my passion for cars started is then, of course, with computers. What you could do software-wise, hardware-wise, and just simply styling. And by the way, I'm a Swede, so I need to bring forward Håkan Lantz, an amazing inventor. Already by 13-14 years old, he built his own mini submarine working. He invented the computer mouse. So he had this, I have one of those. It's a board where you have sort of like a positioning map, and then you have a device that you're moving around in order to correlate it to a position on the screen. And also he invented the the color graphics. And I mean, if he didn't do that, then sure, the computers might have been a gimmick or a fluga, as we say in Swedish. Unfortunately, that brought his entire inventor life to a pause, because he had to stop and do all this legal work, which is in my book completely bullshit. I mean, just pay the man. He did the invention. But Gateway, etc., they didn't comply with that. But Håkan Lans, woohoo! He's a great guy. I wish we had more inventors like that. So I know I will never be like him, but I can always dream. It's very impressive, and I just hope that I can, despite being able to be like him, I hope I can inspire someone to come closer to being like him than I have ever was. That would be a dream come true, actually. Well, actually, just getting someone inspired and enough to find the joy of learning math. That would be a dream for me. Yeah, I think I've answered on all the questions that Sidin wrote, and if you have more questions, then please let me know, and I will answer them in the next episode of Driving Home with Sprutis. So until then, take care, stay safe, because we are in a pandemic. I will do my best to work on the situation. I can't do much, but I can do what I can. And I hope you do too. But yeah, I hope I see you in the next episode. So bye bye.